Well, thanks, Stephanie. Big thank you to you and to Jasmine at Digital Promise for your work in setting up this webinar series and for the invitation to kick it off. I'm looking forward to this discussion. I'm going to move fairly quickly through some ideas and some of the work that we've uncovered. I really love this format of just a short presentation followed by time to really digest and discuss with colleagues some of the implications. I'm going to share my screen and go through a PowerPoint presentation. So I call this Building Systems for a More Solidarity-Driven Family Engagement Practice. And before I get to what I think that means or how to actually build the systems, I'm going to start by framing the field of family engagement really briefly, and then focusing on some of the core challenges we face so that we can be critical in thinking about what it is that we're actually solving for. So folks may be familiar with this. This is the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships, the second version. This is probably the most used and most known family engagement framework used by school systems today. It's a really helpful distillation of over 50 years of research in the field of family and community engagement in schools. And we don't have time to go into it today, but it may be a really helpful resource to folks who are really trying to dig deeper into understanding the challenges. What are the essential conditions for effective practice? What we should be seeing differently if both families and educators are building their capacity for family engagement? And then what is it that we actually want to see differently? What are the outcomes in young people and in schools that is at the heart and the promise of really effective family engagement work? So you can find this at dualcapacity.org. I start with the end in mind, so I'm actually going to go back. So you see that in the challenge of the framework, the educators and the families are separated. And then when you go to the outcomes, you see that they're not only together, but there's a reciprocal exchange that is taking place. So whereas separate to start, actually conjoined and mutually supportive in the outcomes section. And what we're hoping to see from really promising practice is that educators really are connecting family engagement to the core work of learning and development. They're engaging families as co-creators and co-constructors of educational excellence by honoring families and their funds of knowledge and creating really welcoming cultures. And that when they do that, families are more encouraged and more able to do the things that they can do at home and with school to support their students' learning and success. In a recent piece that I co-authored with Dr. Mapp called Embracing a New Normal Toward a More Liberatory Approach to Family Engagement, what we call out is what we see instead in a lot of schools and systems, which has a long historical legacy, which is that instead of this really promising practice, what we see this promising practice in places and in pockets, I should say. But what we often see is that families are treated as spectators to the work of schools, that their expertise and their wisdom about their children and about their cultural backgrounds and their communities is overlooked or devalued. And that family engagement functions often take on an assimilation function. And what I mean by that is when we look at the totality of the strategy of family engagement strategies in schools and systems, and you look at the resources being deployed towards family engagement, they are usually overwhelmingly family facing. So they're born out of good intentions. So we see a lot of community liaisons that are used in a lot of different ways, but aimed at supporting families. We see parent universities that are designed to help families understand how they can support their kids better at home. And these are not bad. So I just want to clarify, this is not a bad approach. It's just incomplete because it, as a strategy, implicitly says that the change needs to be amongst the families, and it does less to do change work in schools and systems themselves. So the question then becomes, like, why this is problematic, but it's not just the full root of the problem. I feel like the problem actually goes quite a bit deeper, and we can start to see some examples of why do we see this challenge. So my organization, Learning Heroes, we do an annual body of nationally representative surveys of teachers, principals, and families. It's an annual national poll that we do. And one of the questions we asked last year is, well, what influences your approach to family engagement? And you can see that by and large, teachers are saying that it is informal sources. So other teachers they work with, they develop their own approach, much lower true professional development or preparatory coursework. Similarly, when we ask teachers and principals who has the primary responsibility for family engagement at your school, we can see that amongst the principals, about a third say that it's teachers, a third say that it's principals, and a third is split amongst other roles in the school. Teachers do not have this split. Overwhelmingly, teachers say they have the primary responsibility. So what do I read from this? I read that we don't really have consensus on whose job it is to do family engagement work. So we don't train folks. We don't have consensus on whose job it is. When you talk to administrators who oversee principals, if they have a rubric that they're evaluating teachers on, if family engagement is even on that rubric, it tends to be the least valued. So principals, administrators don't necessarily know how to evaluate this work, or they don't necessarily have a good sense of what constitutes really good practice. And so at the end of the day, what we see is schooling systems that are not really designed to promote truly effective partnerships with families, especially not connected to student learning and well-being outcomes. And this is layered on top of families having their own challenges associated with poverty, associated with historical marginalization and oppression and longstanding inequities between families and schools that bear out in the day-to-day interactions between home and school. So we have really thorny challenges. And what we call for in embracing a new normal is a new version of family engagement. And so this is sort of like a North Star. And this is where I'm going to pivot from what are the challenges we see from the lack of thoughtful design for family engagement, or in many cases, a thoughtful design to keep families away from school, to a more thoughtful design approach to really embracing families as true partners. And so what we call for is a new normal that is liberatory, solidarity-driven, and equity-focused. Liberatory means free. It means free of oppression. It means free of existing power dynamics that play out between home and school. I'll speak to those power dynamics in a moment. Solidarity is the way to look at this work. I come from a community organizing background, and in our line of work, we think of not doing for families, but with families. That means really deeply listening to families and seeing them as allies and partners in the work of educating young people. And then equity focused, because this is an equity strategy. To me, this is the potential for a really strong core pillar of a district's equity agenda if it's done right. So how to actually start getting to that path? Again, I'm moving quickly, but I wrote a report last year that, or earlier this year, excuse me, called Unlocking the How. So designing family engagement strategies that lead to school success. And this, whereas embracing a new normal is more of a 10,000-foot look at the field and challenges and a way forward, Unlocking the How is more of a what can I do as a leader on Monday morning? What are some more granular steps that I can take? And it has a lot of examples of schools and systems from around the country that are taking the steps that we suggest. And the steps are pretty concrete, and they're born out of the research in the field and our annual surveys. The first is there really is no way to do this work if you're not building, and in many cases, restoring trust. It's less about communicating things to families, and it's more about building relationships with families. We've all been on good teams and bad teams, and we know that a good team starts with strong relational fundamentals. The second is to please focus on student learning and well-being. A lot of the purpose of family engagement is not just to have a good relationship. The purpose of family engagement is to make a difference for kids. So to the extent that we can anchor our strategies in learning and well-being, the more likely it is going to be to lead to changes for kids. And the last is to build those systems and structures that help adults in the system, that help educators really learn how to do this work over time. The report has a lot of examples of what this looks like in practice, but oftentimes that means hiring senior level staff, making sure teachers have the time to build relationships with families, and getting out into the community as much as possible to do that. And you can read the report for more examples of what that looks like. I'm going to close with this analogy that I've been working through. And it comes from my doctoral work in Chelsea, Massachusetts. That is, it's full of murals. It's a Latino immigrant community, much like my own. So I borrowed this picture from there. The first is to start, think of it as growing a tree or growing an orchard. Everything that grows starts from a seed. And to me, the best seeds are I borrow a term from Mark Warren called seminal experiences. He wrote a really compelling book called Fire in the Heart: How White Activists Embrace Racial Justice. And what he found in interviewing dozens of white leaders for racial justice is that they often had these seminal experiences early in their career that shaped how they think about the effects of discrimination on people of color, and that they shook them in some way. And when I see something similar when educators go into the community, or they have experiences with families that fundamentally shift the power imbalances that already exist between home and school. So it's not like educators come into the profession wanting to wield power over parents, but this is a really good example of the difference between our intent and our impact. Because when we think about who decides what gets talked about when parents and teachers engage with one another, where the meeting takes place, what language the meeting takes place in, who initiates the phone call. For families, it's often a burden to have to come to the school. They have to go out of their comfort zone to come to the school. To the extent that we can shift those burdens, the extent to which we can actually shift those imbalances, we can plant seeds that are very enlightening to teachers and to educators. Oftentimes these are like before and after aha type of experiences. So to me, that serves as like the seed in this analogy. What are those fundamental experiences that shape what educators think that they think about the communities that they serve? And so if you just plant the seed, I mean, anybody who's done any gardening, or even if you haven't done gardening, you understand that like planting a seed on its own doesn't do much. You have to then nurture that seed in the soil. So the soil needs nutrients and it needs some support in order to pop out as a seedling. And so that's like collaboration time with colleagues. That's allocating time on staff meeting agendas, on grade level meeting agendas, on counseling meeting agendas. It means using agenda setting privileges to elevate what we've learned from those experiences and share with each other. And then imagine your seedling starts to pop out of the ground and you have a little seedling, right? Because you've planted the seed and you have that collaboration time, you're starting to see a practice evolving. Well, from there, we need sunshine. We need rainwater. These are factors that are outside of the actual soil, but which are incredibly supportive. So that's the authorizing environment. That is making sure that there is funding available to support teachers in growing their practice, that they have time available, that the resources at the disposal of the leaders are being deployed for this purpose. And then imagine you have a whole plant or you have a whole tree and you have one school that is really excelling. Well, to get rows and rows, to get many schools within a system really building this kind of practice, it takes resources and it takes leaders at the central office and at the school level to really marshal this work and to help build a bigger landscape full of schools that really embrace this philosophy. So that's the analogy. That's where I will pause. I'll just end with just a note for those who are interested that Learning Heroes, my organization, we partner with schools and systems that want to elevate their practice in a number of ways. I'll just focus here on the Leadership Training Institute, which is starting our inaugural cohort of a national virtual leadership training institute begins next month. It is a year-long professional development experience for school principals and school district administrators to learn how to build a family engagement practice with a lot of support and coaching and exposure to the research and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in learning more about that and joining our cohort, you can write me a note and we can go from there. So this is my contact information. Hopefully this will be shared with you afterwards. And I'll pause and turn it back over to Stephanie.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your small group discussions. I was able to listen in on both groups. Very thought-provoking, very interesting and insightful comments from both groups. So we have some questions on the Padlet. And I would like to ask Dr. Bergman to speak to a couple of these. So one question is actually in the, what are the current challenges being faced by your teachers and students? Because one question that's posed there is, what do we do for teachers who are not open-minded? How do we enlighten them if they have a bias that's impacting teaching and learning for Black and Brown students?
Well, the first thing I would say is that we should normalize the notion of bias. Everybody has bias. It's a fact of being human. That doesn't excuse biases. Here's how I think about bias. The very fact that we have limited life experiences, nobody is omnipotent, nobody has lived every experience there is to live, means that we have built a way of seeing the world that is influenced by who we are and what we've experienced, which means that there are a lot of things, most things in this world that we have not experienced. We can't live outside of ourselves, which means that everybody has biases. So I think whenever we talk about biases, we need to remember that everybody has them. To me, the act of liberation and the act of liberatory work means beginning to notice, not just beginning, notice. It's a lifelong process of noticing where your life experiences limit you. Everybody has limitations in their life experiences. So the equity journey that everybody should be on is that, what are those things that I haven't realized, and how do they shape and influence my thinking and my approaches and my behaviors and my actions and the way I talk about things and so on and so forth. So it's really important to model this. Most people are much more comfortable saying, this person has a bias. There are biases out. Our surveys show that overwhelming percentages of teachers and principals say that more work is needed to address biases people have. People see that there are biases. Very few people stand up and say, let me tell you about my biases. The stakes are very high. If you do that, most people have not had practice doing that, so they feel clunky in doing that. It doesn't come out right. And so people just avoid that conversation. So leadership modeling what that looks like is extremely important. And then I would say, when you model it and you start to expect people to start to do some level of awareness raising. This is why like the home visits are really helpful, because you can have concrete examples that people have lived through that clash with their notions of what they thought about families or what they thought about the community that they're serving, which in many cases is different from their own upbringing. So how do you create space, brave spaces, where folks can say, I used to think that the community was this way, and now I'm starting to see that the community is a little bit different. But you have to create those experiences and those opportunities where people have they get to confront those experiences with their own experiences, with their own lived experiences. It's much harder to do it abstractly based on book talks about racism, anti-racism, bias, privilege. It's an important part of an overall picture, but people really need to rely on their lived experiences. And then once you start to model that, and once you start to create space for that, then you can start to expect it. And then I think we need to like help people along that journey, oftentimes pairing people up that have similar experiences. Like my experience as a white Latino is that a lot of white people like talk to me in ways that they don't talk to people of color. Very frankly, they are willing to say things to me. And so then my push then is like, how are we going to like actually take that and bring it closer to the surface? How are we going to raise that in larger groups, help people along that journey? And if people are totally unwilling and totally intransigent, then they have no business working in communities of color. That's how I feel about it. I think everybody deserves a chance to actually make ground and make improvement, but we also have a responsibility to make sure that the right people are educating our babies. So that's how I feel about that.
No, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the connections that you're making there to the way that we design our principal pipelines. That's the Wallace Foundation work, that the original report that I mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar was all about what is the principal pipeline in a virtual environment? What are the things that we need to be considering? And principal preparation is one aspect of that. So I think how do we prepare our aspiring principals to model those behaviors is a really important conversation that we need to continue. How are we supervising our principals as they are in buildings, and what that looks like in that context? And then, excuse me, the other thing that really stood out to me was your last comment about principal placement. And what are the leader tracking systems that school districts are using to identify the communities where principals will be a good fit and be of good service to that community. So really appreciate those connections. The other question that is on our Padlet is, what network or space can we connect to continue the conversation and tap into resources? So we have some at Digital Promise that I'm going to share in just a moment, but I didn't know if you had any that you wanted to share.
We were saying, I think I heard you right. You said networking spaces. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, sign up for our newsletter. You can learn what Learning Heroes is up to. I would also, the National Family Engagement Conference is a great place to get connected to colleagues that are leading in this work and interested in this work. That's hosted by the Institute for Educational Leadership, IEL. You may be interested in joining the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. That's NAFSCE for short, NAFSCE. It's a membership organization. They also host a summit every year, and they're sort of like a clearinghouse. They have a lot of connection to the world of family and community engagement. I would surf our site and see what's of interest as far as professional development, professional learning experiences, tools and resources. We have a lot there, and if folks have other questions, I'm happy to follow up from there. But I think that that's a good place to start. Those 3 recommendations.
Thank you for those. That's wonderful. So here are some places that you can go next. So I mentioned at the very beginning that there will be a blog that follows up on this, that will share our learnings, our conversations. So you can follow us at Digital Promise to get information about that. And this is the first webinar in a 4-part series. So we have webinars coming up on September 22nd around mathematics and language with Dr. Judith Moskovich. October 13th, Dr. Mimi Ito will be talking with us about student voice and agency. October 27th will be with Dr. Tamara Clegg on leveraging the village for real-world community science learning. And we'll wrap up our series on November 10th with a conversation about equity and culturally relevant teaching and learning with Dr. Thomas Philippe. So you can join us for those, and we will share that information in a follow-up email with you as well. And then another opportunity we have for you at Digital Promise is our learning salons. And so I believe Sharina is going to speak with us about these.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, I'm Sharina Bates, and I am the Senior Program Manager leading the work of the Learning Salons in the Center for Inclusive Innovation. And I want to briefly share with you some of the work we're doing with the salons and how you can get connected and learn more. So just really quickly, the heartbeat of the Learning Salons is really about bringing together BIPOC-led solution providers who often may not have the capital or the visibility to be seen by districts, and bringing them together with district leaders to engage in what we call a co-design experience, where we prioritize the district's problem of practice and curate providers who have programs, technologies, services that best align with the district's named problem of practice. And so on your screen, you'll see that just this year, we hosted 3 learning salons: social and emotional learning and family engagement, mental health and trauma-informed practices, and real world learning. And our impact to date has really been phenomenal. We have engaged 13 school districts, 12 BIPOC-led solution providers, and 7 matches out of the co-design experience have happened. We want to share with you what we have coming up next, and dropping in a chat near you is a link to learn more information. We have our social studies virtual salon showcase that is coming down the line. If that's something that you're interested in, we'd love to have you. And then we have a convening that's happening next month. Our Inclusive Innovation convening and League of Innovative Schools convening is happening in the same week, where we will showcase BIPOC-led solution providers who highlight social studies. And if that's something that you're interested in, you can certainly sign up to attend. And the link is in the chat. You can click there to sign up and learn more information and get connected. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you, Sharina. And thank you to all of our attendees today. We really appreciate you being here and sharing part of your day with us. Thank you again to Dr. Bergman for sharing your expertise. And thank you to the Wallace Foundation and Will Jordan, who joined us today representing the Wallace Foundation. We appreciate your support in this endeavor. We hope to see you at another webinar. Thanks so much and have a great day.